Hi there, it's Kathy. Welcome to another episode of A Journey into Cybersecurity. Today's episode is sponsored again by T&T Creative Group. Today I've invited someone who I got to cross paths with a while ago, and he too stumbled into cybersecurity, and it is my sincere honor to share his story with y'all because it's very inspiring. And his name is Mark Fitzner. Hey, Mark.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's good to see you again. How are you?
It's been a while, too long,
Yes.
but I'm pleased and honored to have you as our guest.
Well, likewise, I appreciate you having me on. This is really great, and I've watched. We talked a little bit a week or two ago, and I've seen the first couple of episodes, and really cool what you're doing here. So it's great to be to have this opportunity to be on here with you.
I love it. Thank you for that feedback. It's always a rewarding thing when someone actually recognizes the work that you're trying to accomplish and wants to be part of that. So thank you.
Of course.
So how should we introduce you, Mark? What is your title? What do you do? Where do you work?
So just real quick, legalese statement out there to get on the video. Since I am here, this is purely just me as myself, not as a representative of my employer, before I name drop them. So currently I am employed by a large contract research organization called PRA Health Sciences. And I work as, my formal title is Principal Cybersecurity Specialist. I work as the senior member of a 2-person red team. So we are the, basically the pen testers internal to the organization who we conduct internal testing, we do security testing on applications, we do security testing on the network. We provide guidance and consulting to the organization, various different groups within the company that might need someone who's a specialist in security to give them direction on how to implement things. That's kind of where I sit currently.
Right. So you impersonate the bad actors who are trying to get in through your testing skills.
Yes. So we do a number of things. One of them is what we call adversary simulation. So that's where we're doing from the outside in, if an attacker were to target this company, this organization, what would they be able to get access to? And if they got access to something, what would they then be able to do that could harm the company? And then, of course, the goal of that exercise is to take that information, take the output of that, and then provide it to the folks internally who can fix it if we have a finding. And they can then put in place controls. They can change things. They can basically block those holes that an adversary might be able to use.
Yes, absolutely. And sometimes I've run into all kinds of organizations where testing is not necessarily something that they do on a regular basis, but it seems to me that definitely when you're in the research of medical biotech, that there are a lot of crown jewels to be protected, and the value thereof and the cost of losing that data could be detrimental to that organization.
Yeah, specific to this organization, of course, they have a lot of intellectual property, a lot of proprietary information and development. So that's what makes the organization valuable. So that's they are a a publicly traded organization, but an organization with a lot of private intellectual property that has to be protected. So it's crucial because and it's not. That's one consideration, right? So security, for those who aren't familiar, there's the common CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And integrity is just as crucial when you're an organization that is involved in clinical research. Any indication that data could be modified in a way that it's not intended to be would be very detrimental. So it's just as important to have confidentiality on the intellectual property as it is to protect the data and make sure it's not being tampered with or accessed by someone who shouldn't have access to it.
Right. And the biotech space, especially these days, we're in the midst of a pandemic after all, has been definitely very much targeted, always has been, but there's this race of being first at finding a cure, at finding a formula without having to spend all the R&D that goes in it. And we know certain actors whose business model is to hack the research and to not invest in it. It is a business to them to do that. Any words on that?
Yeah, and it's not unique to this industry. That's very broad. I would say we've certainly seen things in the news more recently that are specific to this industry. Just again, because of, like you mentioned, being in a global pandemic, there's obviously a very significant interest in whatever research information there might be available to obtain. But just as a general kind of approach, there are organizations and actors that are, it's the skill set they have available, or it's just easier in terms of return on investment to focus on gaining illegitimate access to someone else's research and development than to try and recreate that research and development.
So I want to keep going and down that rabbit hole with you, but let's learn first about how Mark the kid stumbled into cybersecurity. So let's start at the beginning. So what were you like as a young boy, and where did you grow up?
Okay, so I'll start with the second one first because it's quicker and easier. So I grew up in South Carolina, just south of the North Carolina border. So I was probably 15, 20 minutes away from Charlotte, North Carolina, which is a pretty major city there. I grew up there, and I was there, my entire life in one house until I moved out and got my own place. As for what I was like, definitely I was a shy kid. I was in my teen years, I was kind of the awkward kid, particularly around people my own age. So just a little bit of background on me as far as my education growing up, I was completely homeschooled K through 12. And so the first time I ever entered a public educational institution was when I went to community college for my 2-year degree. And so I was in this set where I was always more comfortable around adults than I was people my own age, because I interacted more socially with adults than I did with kids my own age. I had friends my own age, but it was, the neighborhood kids, the kids at church, things like that. But when it came to actually interacting with the world and learning how to converse with people, it was mostly adults. And so there was definitely a period of time when I was growing up where that was awkward, because there were the people that were in the age group I was supposed to be in, and I was kind of shy with them. But the fun part about that is you kind of grow out of it, because now I'm an adult and everybody around me is adults, and I was already good at that, so it's fine.
Nobody notices.
Yeah, not anymore.
You're not any different anymore. But the thing is, it's probably the way you saw yourself. Maybe the other kids didn't even notice, right? Or was it just?
It would depend on the context. So I was definitely a kid who, I was very nerdy. Obviously I'm in tech, that kind of goes without saying. But I was, I remember going to summer camp and being kind of picked on by some of the more bigger, tougher kids. I was a little bit bullied, and I didn't know how to deal with it. Right. There was definitely a little bit of that in my background. So there was, I think there's an intuitive sense when somebody in your group is a little different. People will pick up on it naturally, and kids are kids. So some of them are not great at handling something like that.
Yeah. So I grew up in Belgium, and homeschooling was not a thing. I was foreign to that concept when I got to the United States. So how does that work? What's the difference for the audience like me in other countries who'd be interested in that?
Sure. So, I can't give a, on average example. I can give my experience of it. As I understand it, there are kind of two main categories of folks who homeschool their kids. There's, you've got the really, really super rich on the one hand, who can just afford to have in-home teachers and tutors and whatever, even above private school. That was not the group I was part of. The other group is, because of personal family beliefs, often religious, but it can be for different reasons. They don't want their kids to go into the public school system. So in some cases, they live in an area where they just know the school system is bad, and they want to, they think they can do a better job. As far as the content of it, I don't have the public schooling experience to compare it to, but the glimpses that I've seen of that. My sister did do part-time in public schooling. I was completely homeschooled. Sometimes the curriculum is different. So again, especially if there's a belief-based aspect to it, there may be textbooks that are different with somewhat different content that's more in line with those beliefs and those views. So as far as what I can speak to, my upbringing was religion was an important part of my parents' life, and so the science textbooks that we had were a little bit different than what I would probably view as the standard and the consensus accepted content in some areas. A lot of it was much the same, right? There's not much to change in reading and writing and arithmetic, so those subjects were probably very much comparable to what would have been in a public school classroom. But I'd say the main difference, aside from some of the content, is the approach, right? You're not going to a classroom. I was never on a school bus except for like going to summer camp or things like that, where I would be part of a group. It was, get up and you're already at school. You might be eating cereal while you're listening to your first lecture from, in my case, it was my mom, who was my teacher. She had the formal textbooks and everything to read from. But there's a big difference in the formality, or there can be, right? Obviously it's to the option of the parents who are implementing it. So it could be more strict or less strict. And there was a schedule, certainly, but being it's mom as the teacher, there were definitely times when I could maybe weasel out of some of the things that I should have been doing. At the time, that was great. In hindsight, I probably ended up, got a little bit too relaxed in some areas. So there are pros and cons to it.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me because I personally can't imagine myself doing this with my children. They just would not get along with me. It's still being great in first grade, I think.
There was definitely some angst that would go on when it was, because it's yes, it's your teacher, but it's your mom, and your mom, and it's whichever. And every now and then, my dad would do it too, occasionally, when if my mom had to take care of something, and it was very different with my dad. But at the end of the day, they're your parents, and so it's whatever that relationship looks like is it's going to color the overall tone of it.
Yes. And were you doing sports too, or music, or other the extracurricular stuff that some kids tend to do?
No, so that's probably one of the areas where I missed out the most. My mom, to her credit, did try to get me interested in some of those things, and there are programs that people who aren't in school can participate in. I was never interested in sports. I didn't really get into very much creative, and that was probably an aspect more of just the family perception. Growing up, it's actually interesting. So this is an observation on the power of words and thoughts. Is growing up, I remember to this day hearing in our family the phrase, "We're just not creative people." That it was just one of those things. I just took it for granted. Like, oh yeah, some people they're musicians, they're artists, whatever, but we're not those people. That's just not what we do. And in my as I got into adulthood, I learned that that's there are people who are born gifted and they're just a natural savant at something, but those are actually rare. Most of the people who are creative people, they have to work really hard at it, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of practice. So it's not in camera right now, but I have a bass guitar in the background. That's something that I got into later in life. It would have been awesome had I done that earlier. There would have been many hours of practice that I would have been more adept than I am. I just kind of fiddle with it, which is probably not great considering it's not a fiddle. But the lack of exposure there would have, that would have been better in hindsight if I had been more exposed to some things. And some of that was just my parents weren't into certain things, so I didn't get into them. And some of it was also probably, if there's a fault in the approach, my parents probably gave me too much decision-making ability too early in life. So they would ask me, do you want to do thing X? And if I was like, no, I don't, then okay, well, that was the answer. He doesn't want to do it. But kids don't know anything, right? So in hindsight, I probably should have been pushed into some more things than I was, so that I would have been exposed to some different things, whether it be sports or creative projects or whatever else.
But it sounds like you found your inner creativity now that you're playing music. And let's be clear, the testing part of your work requires a level of creativity as well, right?
It does, and that's probably where I spend the most of my, the creative aspect of my life probably comes in with computers, right? It's writing code is a creative process. It's a technical process, but it's also you have to figure out how to solve a problem. And a lot of times you're using references and you're asking other people who know more than you do, but some of the time you're just coming up with a quick and dirty way is the way to get through a problem, right? If you're in an engagement, you're in a testing engagement, you're trying to hack some system, you're trying to exploit some vulnerability. Often, good enough is good enough, right? You don't have to make the perfect, most efficient, elegant piece of code as long as that code is achieving the goal that you set out to do in the timeline that you have in which to do it. So that's probably where it comes out most. I wouldn't call myself a creative musician or anything of that in that area, but a little bit of a dabbler, right? But it's one of those things where I think it's important to encourage the possibility of something, and just that phrase that we're not creative people, like that was just true. That was just gospel to me as a kid because my parents were saying it, right? Wow. So I never questioned it until much later. And that's it wasn't anything that was bad intent. I'm sure it was sincerely believed, but I think it was actually wrong. So it was one of those things I had to grow beyond and later learn that, oh yeah, I could be creative. I could pursue that. I could, if I really wanted to work at being a musician, I could. Now the drive has never inspired me to do that. I've focused more on computers, but it's analogous, right? It's still something you have to put a lot of time into. Hacking is just as much a practice, and there are aspects of it that you could call an art. That there are people who are. I don't count myself in this pool either, but there are people who are brilliant and can see the inner workings of systems just so intuitively and come up with new ways to exploit a system that are, when you see them as an observer, you're like, wow, that's amazing, yeah. Right? That's even beautiful, right? It's really impressive. That also comes from exposure and time and practice and effort. And for very few people does that just come naturally as a gift.
Yeah. I love what you said about the power of words. That is so true. So true. So when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Unlike some of your guests, I had no idea. And I'm not sure if I still do, because I don't consider myself fully grown up. I'm still a work in progress, but I don't really remember having like a single clear vision of what I was going to be when I grew up. I know I'm sure in childhood I had the typical firefighter, policeman, whatever kind of hero character type jobs in mind at some point. And I don't have any memory of what conversations there may or may not have been. I know my mom was always very positive on encouraging me to find some sort of a professional job, and she wasn't very specific beyond that. It was, what do you want to do? So there definitely was within that lane of, you're going to, you definitely need to get your education. You definitely need to get a real job. It was up to me to figure out what I wanted that to be. Right. So there wasn't ever a clear path. There was never like I'm going to be an astronaut, or if there was, it was fleeting, right? The little kid fantasy, but it was never like that's my dream and that's the thing I'm going to do. It's always been much more of there's so many things I don't know which one to pursue, and I'd say that's still somewhat true. Like I've definitely found a fit in penetration testing as a concept, but there's a lot within penetration testing. There's a lot of different specialties that one can get into. I've always been a little bit more of a generalist in the things that I do. So whether that, earlier in my career, that was general information technology, infrastructure management, and then later into security. I'm still kind of, I guess I'm greedy for knowledge. So I like to know a lot about, I like to know a little about a lot. So there's not really a single area that I'm kind of locked into.
Yeah. Anything that you learned in those first years, K through 12, that wasn't per se in a textbook?
So I mentioned a little bit about being bullied and things like that. So I would say that was, I think that's a ubiquitous experience for a lot of young folks, whether they're in a school or not. It's interacting with other kids. Some kids are going to be kind of bullies, and some kids are going to be cool, and there's kind of everything in between. I don't know if I took the lessons at the time. It just kind of sucked at the time. But looking back on it, those were important things to understand, that like there are some people who they are going to act in a way that's, looking back on it, selfish, or it's not in your interest, certainly, right? You're just there. And it's important after the fact to understand that it's not about you, right? It could have been any other kid who wouldn't stand up for themselves in that situation. So it's not unique to you. It's nothing wrong with you. That's probably a lesson that came to me later in life, and seeing how other people have turned out who had the same experience, who, school sucked for them, or being around kids their age sucked for them. But as they grew up, they often, find success and make something of themselves. And to borrow the words, there's actually a really great clip by a celebrity. His name's Will Wheaton. A lot of people love him. He was on Star Trek: The Next Generation as a kid actor. He was on there. I think he was early teens when he was on that show. And he does a bunch of other nerd stuff these days, like board games and whatever. But there was this one really great clip of him at one of those conferences for, I think it was like Comic-Con, or one of the big conferences where a bunch of, where nerds gather, right? And a little girl asked him, like, when you were a kid, did people call you a nerd? And if so, how did you deal with it? And he had an excellent answer, and he put it much more eloquently and naturally than I could. But it was, I remember the ending part of it was, as you get older, it gets better. And, look around you, there's like, I don't know what the number was. There's like 50,000 people here this weekend, and we all went through the same experience. And you hear the crowd laugh in that moment because they all had that same experience. And he's like, and now we're all doing really well for ourselves, right? So it's something that you kind of grow out of, and the same things that made you a nerd to get picked on when you were younger turn into the things that make you a valuable and even respected professional, because the focus that you can apply in your field, it's nerdiness, right? It's a focus and being able to get into something and go in depth with it.
Yeah, powerful lesson. Very good. So you went to York Technical College. How did you get there, and how was that experience?
So that was just location and what was accessible, right? So my sister had gone there. My sister's about 8 years older than me, so she like I said, she did some public schooling, and then when she went to college, she went to York Tech. So it was just kind of a no-brainer path that I was my mom, like I said, my parents encouraged me to get my college education. That was certainly crucial. And so York Tech was just kind of a no-brainer. It was the one community college nearby that I could definitely get into. And so there wasn't even really any, for me, shopping around and looking at different schools. I knew I didn't, this was a choice that I made fairly early on. I knew I didn't want to take out student loans. I didn't want to go into debt to get my education. So York Tech was affordable at the time. And when I went, it was even more expensive than when my sister went. And now, college costs keep going up. So that's a societal issue that a lot of younger folks face. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't even in consideration to go to a better school, especially for the first couple of years, because a lot of those, you're getting remedial education, you're getting kind of the intro to what you might want to pursue, but you're not actually focusing on the core curriculum yet. So it was just kind of a natural no-brainer path to go there. As far as the experience there, it was my first exposure to a public learning institution, to actually be in it. And it was hit or miss, right? There's some really excellent teachers that I had that they're still memorable to me, and I would say they changed my life for the better, because they put in extra time and focus and gave me opportunity to do well. And like any school, there were some teachers that I felt like I knew more than the teacher did on the subject, and so those were just things where I just had to kind of keep quiet and get through it, or in some cases maybe help, right? If there was one, I remember one example really early on, there was like an intro to computers class, which I was already well beyond because I was a nerd playing with computers and such. And the class was, I want to say it was 100 or 150 people in the classroom, like way more than one instructor can help.
Wow.
So the instructor noticed that like I was done with the exercises really quick. And like, hey, she called on me to like, hey, could you maybe assist some of the folks near you? And so I just kind of accidentally became a teacher's assistant for that class for that semester, just kind of going around and seeing if people didn't understand something or kind of showing them. And so I accidentally got some exposure to very informal teaching assistant kind of role, which was, again, that was on that instructor to notice that oh, here's a student who they're done with it, maybe they can be helpful, and to encourage that and kind of set that example. So that was a memorable experience.
I bet, and very empowering too. It must have built that self-confidence a little bit and gotten you to more be socializing and approach fellow students more openly. That's awesome. On your LinkedIn, it said that you made President's List and Dean's List.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so those are GPA-based awards. So once I started in school, I actually, taking a step back from that, I don't know when I learned this philosophy, but at some point along my development, and it was fortunately fairly early, I picked up the philosophy of whatever thing you're going to do it to the best of your ability, right? So if you're going to spend your time studying, focus on studying. If you're going to, if you're doing a job like in your work, do that thing and do it well. Again, I don't know who to attribute that to. It's probably multiple sources over time, but it stuck with me. And so once I started in school, and what's interesting is like when I was doing the homeschooling thing, that probably was not true. That didn't apply because in some aspects I didn't take it as seriously as I should have. But once I got into York Tech, I wanted to do well. I wanted to get A's, right? So I applied myself I was very focused in doing well, in learning what I could from the classes. So even like I mentioned that class where I was ahead of the content of the class, and like the whole semester, like I should have just tested out and not had that class in hindsight. But I tried to at least learn what I could from it, right? That this is what I'm doing. I'm going to do my best at it. And there's something here that I can learn, even if I don't realize what it is at the time, right? So like that example of that exposure of being an assistant and helping the instructor, I was learning from that process, even if at the time I didn't feel like I was teaching, right? But I was learning how to teach, which is, in hindsight, that's really important, and how to communicate to people. So the philosophy there is, whatever you're going to spend your time doing, there's something you can learn. Find that thing and just focus on it. So it could be a meeting at work, and it could be really boring, but there's probably something in there you can learn. It's whether it's about the work, or it's about the company, or it's about the people involved, or it's about how something can be presented. That there's always an opportunity to pick something up. So once with that philosophy in mind, I just kind of applied myself, and I wanted to get A's, and I wasn't 100% straight A, but I was mostly A's, a couple of lower grades in a couple of classes, but that was my goal. And so I ended up on those lists for the high GPA.
That's amazing. No, I went to college. There were lists and I didn't know about them, but I definitely was never on anybody's list. So I wanted to highlight that, and congratulations. So what came next after York Tech?
So while I was working at York Tech, one of the instructors, like I said, I had a few there who were influential on my life and my trajectory. One of them was, her name was Barbara Stoops. She was one of the technology teachers who was teaching, I was taking some Microsoft server classes, and she taught those. She had, her professional network, and she put me in touch with a recruiting company that was hiring for a tech support role. And so while I was still in my 2-year college, I got my first opportunity at a tech adjacent job, I'll say. It was actually a customer service job, really. But it was in troubleshooting and tech support. Prior to that, I'd worked in a restaurant, which was, kind of a friend of the family opportunity just to make some money working as a busboy and a waiter. And got the opportunity through my instructor to contact this recruiting company and interview with them for this job, and I ended up working at a local ISP. So it was a regional local ISP that, this was dial-up connections for folks, especially a lot of folks in more rural areas where there wasn't high-speed internet at the time. Most of that was still in the middle of the city at the time, and it still isn't in a lot of areas. But it was, in a phone queue, taking phone calls. They would come in, you have a spiel of, thank you for calling tech support, how can I help, kind of thing. And they're going to describe an issue, and you're talking with the end user who doesn't know anything about computers in most cases, and they just know it's not working, and they want to get on and read the internet. They want to send emails to their family. That was definitely an exposure to irate customers. There was a significant percentage that, they would call in and they're already angry because the thing's not working, and there's profanities in there, and they're yelling at you. So there was definitely a learning and growth experience there of just how to deal with people when they're not happy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And on the topic of agency, I love how a teacher got you that opportunity. And like you said, it's kind of like, okay, you can learn something, but you can also build a bridge into your next thing, mm-hmm. whether that is a job opportunity or a learning opportunity. What other cheerleaders crossed your paths that believed in you and kind of helped you along the way?
So at that point in my life, again, teachers were very influential on me. So there were a couple others that kind of stood out as like they impacted me directly. So I had a couple of programming classes. One was with Brian Hipp, and then the others with Jiron Baxter. They were two memorable teachers that they would stay late after class with me and help me on the projects that I was working on. They would, they were interested in they saw that I was interested in actually learning the content, and so they kind of went out of their way to help more. I had an English instructor. His name was Martin Grant, who he actually probably kept me from getting in trouble one time. Just like a really stupid, not even thinking type of action that I was taking was I was carrying a pocket knife on campus, which is not allowed. And I didn't even think anything of it, but it was visible. It was clipped to my pants, and he like took me aside and he was like, "You can't do that. You can't have that on campus. You could get, you could be arrested for that." And I was like, "Oh, I didn't even know. Like, just stupid me, right? Just dumb 19-year-old or whatever I was at the time." So like just that little act of watching out and caring for me, and then, we had other conversations that were memorable as well. And he was very encouraging, but just folks going out of their way at that level, that they helped me in ways that at the time I was oblivious to, right? I couldn't really fully appreciate it, but looking back, they certainly they either put me on the right trajectory or they kept me from getting on a bad trajectory, which it's easy to appreciate after the fact.
Yes, I think that teachers are angels, and they have a special place in heaven when they're done with all that teaching. It's just amazing.
They put up with a lot, because I saw like there were a number of teachers too where like I mentioned myself, and I wasn't the perfect student, but I think I was pretty good. But every now and then there was like a troublemaker student in the class who just wanted to argue, and like I do remember even at the time being like, "Wow, that's not why you're here." Right? It was weird. I never had the attitude to be argumentative with a teacher, but at the same time, like I said, there were teachers who like I felt like I knew more than they did, but I didn't get like angry at them over it. It was just like, okay, there's got to be something else here, right? What else can I learn? Because I'm going to be here. I paid for this thing, and I was paying out of pocket while I was in school, so it was. I guess that helped me take it a little bit more seriously because it was my money. And that's a challenge. I think if you take out a loan, it's abstracted, or if, ideally, if your folks can afford it, that's great. It's an awesome opportunity, but it probably doesn't connect you quite as much with, this is the chance I get to do this. I can't afford to do it again. Mm-hmm. So that probably changed the tone somewhat.
Who were your role models growing up?
Well, obviously my parents. Just about everyone's role models, because you're exposed to them the most, and you see how they do things. Outside of the family, again, school was very influential once I got into it, because that was my first sort of exploration into a more public world, and seeing other people. So those instructors that I mentioned, they definitely inspired me. Even though if you asked me at the time if they were my role models, I don't know if I would have thought to name them. And then, in more, nerd space, there are people who have, over the years, there are people that I've come to appreciate. They're, philosophy thinkers, who, some are current and some are folks that have passed on. But there are podcasts that I listen to, today, a speaker like Sam Harris, who he gets himself into a lot of trouble asking difficult questions in a public forum. But it's to encourage conversation, right? And I look up to that a lot. When I was younger, and even still, like someone like John Carmack, who was one of the founders of id Software, the people who made Doom, the video game. I follow him on Twitter these days, and like his mind is so like the way he grasps technology and can just comprehend things at a deep level and then explain them is really, really impressive. So I really look up to people like that, who they're really, really good at what they do. They're specialists in a really sophisticated area. And I would say, like, he's an example of someone who has changed the world, because we now have VR technology to a degree that it was just kind of stagnating. And he's not the only player by far, but I think he was instrumental in kind of bringing that more mainstream than it had been prior to his contributions to it.
Yeah. So you follow a lot of people on Twitter?
Oh yeah, there's a ton. InfoSec as an industry has a lot of active figures. And they cover all the bases. So a lot of them are in technology. A lot of them are on the culture side of it and how to interact with people. So there's a ton of really great resources. Twitter's not the best venue, but it's really great for just little snippets of information at a time. So I probably follow like 100 to 200 people that are primarily in information security.
Right. And I do too. And I actually, on my website, thetrianglenet.com, under resources, I actually created a list of all of the different security groups or people who have, good content, and it's good to follow. Mm-hmm. Just a news feed for InfoSec all by itself, I think.
Yep.
So we were still talking about York, and then getting into the help desk type of role. So what happened next?
So this is a great example of where it's less about who you are and it's more about who you know. Mm-hmm. After working at tech support, I had my colleagues. We were all entry level, and most of us weren't very professional. And it was a very relaxed environment. Wearing shorts and flip flops and whatever. And some folks moved on from that. They were at that stage where they were trying to find the next thing. And somebody that I had worked with, when he moved on to another employer, and when asked if there were other people there that they might look into, I was one of the names he mentioned, as well as some other folks who had stuck out. And so we got opportunities to interview with that company, and ended up getting roles there. So moved from an hourly, it was like an $8 an hour tech support job, to my first salaried position working it's a managed service provider company that they provided in a lot of ways the same support, but for business customers rather than for individuals. So they were responsible for connecting these businesses up to the internet, maintaining the systems that kept them online. And if something went down, we had to troubleshoot. So it was a network operations center is what it was called. You're still fielding calls, but instead of fielding calls from, literal, grandmothers who don't know how the computer works, you're usually taking it from a business person or from a technician who's there to install the equipment. So it was kind of a step up in terms of what I was exposed to, and the complexity and the professionalism of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So how did you make the step into cybersecurity then?
In terms of how I got into cybersecurity, the path was kind of slow. It was gradual and then sudden, to borrow a phrase. Because as you're doing any infrastructure IT technology, you're being exposed to security concepts, but they may not be presented in that formal way. But if you're configuring routers, you're configuring access control lists, which are an access control, which is part of security. If you're administering servers, you're creating security groups and user groups, and you're putting the right people in the right groups to have access to the resources they need. That's a security function. That's access control. So you're getting exposed to some of that. And so I was building those pieces, but how I kind of stumbled into it is when I was working on my 4-year degree. This was at East Carolina University. I was doing long distance education. I was never on campus. It was all just remote.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was working full time, in the Charlotte area, and so I was doing school there. Actually, I finished that degree once I moved to Raleigh, which came a little bit later. But it was entirely remote, and that was the reason that I chose that school. Was it was affordable, and they had a 100% remote program that was in my my focus, which was one thing I didn't mention at York Tech. I basically had the option of two majors that were even a possibility. It was computer programming or it was computer networking. Those were the only two tracks they really had. I was like, well, I don't want to do programming, so I guess I'll do networking. I knew nothing about it. So that was one of those things where I just kind of went where the wind took me. But so once I had done that, right, I had 2 years of education in that field. I wanted to continue that and work towards a 4-year degree and not have to start over. So I found a program where those credits would transfer at ECU. And it was a slightly like a diagonally offshoot kind of program, but they took most of my credits and I was able to work on it. So anyway, I'm in the 4-year institution. I'm working on my CCNA, which is the Cisco Certified Network Associate certification. And as an elective, I took the CCNA security class. And that class was the first time I had a textbook where I was just like, I'm studying, I'm just doing homework, and I actually stop and I set the book down. And I go, that is so cool. Because what I was reading about was, and it's lame now by comparison, but there's an attack called VLAN hopping, where you can basically, it's the concept is you have this type of, it's called a frame. You have a certain tag that says, here's the network I'm supposed to be on, basically. And that's the design of it. So if there's network 100, network 200, my traffic's supposed to go to network 100, but the switch handles that. It says, oh, that port, you're allowed to go over here, right? It's kind of a loose security control. And somebody realized that if you can tamper with the frames, you can add a second tag. So you can say, I'm supposed to be on VLAN 100, and then another tag is, I'm actually supposed to be on VLAN 200, and the switch will process that. So your traffic will end up in a different network that it's not supposed to be in. Mm-hmm. And like that concept to me at the time was mind blowing. I'd never seen that. I'd never heard that. And I was just like, wow, I want to know more about that. And it really just kind of like, it got its hooks in me. And I changed up some of my other electives to focus on security. I started looking for all the resources I could get to digest online about cybersecurity. And it just became a fascination. It's something that to this day, I find it really interesting that there are ways to take a system is built and designed to do a certain thing, and there are ways to trick it. There are ways to make it function in a way it was not intended to work. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of times, bad actors will do that. That's what, malicious hacking is. But then there are also they're the good folks who, the white hats who we try to do the same thing, but we try to find it before the bad actors find it. Exactly. And so that kind of opened the door to me to this different world. And I switched my focus and started getting different job positions that more and more had security as a specific focus of the role, firewall administration, and then moving up into where we met, where I was a consultant with a company that was providing cybersecurity consulting services.
Yes, and it was very interesting to me that you started, in my perspective, right? You started as an assessor or a consultant, and then you pivoted into penetration testing and the more technical aspect of it. So how did that journey go?
Yeah, correct. So the first, I'd say first solid year of my time that was at Agio, where we worked together.
Yes.
It was hands-off consulting. So it was sitting across the table from somebody, and you got some spreadsheets and some tools to prompt you to ask certain questions, and you're trying to basically take an inventory of how that organization runs their security. Mm-hmm. There's no hacking involved in that. It's there may be someone else there who's doing a pen test in parallel, because those things work very well together, but it wasn't me doing it at the time. But I had learned about pen testing through the wonders of the internet and what it was, and I was very interested in it, and I'd been doing a lot of self-study. So on my own time, because my classes weren't really preparing me for that at the time. I don't think there even was a professional program in cybersecurity that a lot of schools are adding those now. But it was purely self-study. There are a lot of interesting talks on the internet, on on YouTube. As time went on, more and more it was on YouTube.
Yeah.
But there are people's blogs, there are different publications. 2600 magazine it's been going for years and years. I actually discovered it really late in my information security career, but it's a resource where people are just describing ways that they've found that a system can either be improved or can be attacked. And I just always found that fascinating. So I knew I wanted to get involved in pen testing. I didn't really have the exposure to it. And so I was doing all this self-study. I was learning a lot. And one of the benefits of having a professional role is you can request training. You can request to go and take professional training on the company's dime. And so I requested a pen testing class. It was my first pen test focused formal class that I ever took. It was a SANS class, SEC 560, which is their kind of intro to pen testing. And I learned a couple of things that were, I think, really important to me in that class. One of them was just content. So there were some things that I just never seen before and I was exposed to, and they were really cool. Maybe some tools I wasn't familiar with. But since I've been doing all this self-study, the bigger thing was actually validation, because I probably actually knew 50 to 75% of the content already. And it was really validating to hear someone who does this for a living, who runs their own pen testing company, who trains people on pen testing, week in and week out, confirming that the things I was studying and the things I knew how to do were valid and they were part of what was needed to be done for this field. And I was like, oh, wow, I already know most of how to do pen testing, right? Because I'd been spending the time as a hobby because I was interested in it. Yeah. That was really crucial to me, because when I came back, after my week of training, I pushed really hard at work to start doing pen testing, which I hadn't been doing yet. I communicated with basically everyone who would listen that it's something I want to be doing. I'm ready to start doing it. And I was fortunate to have a director that I reported to who was willing to basically take that chance on me. Right? We had a conversation. I remember he asked me, are you sure you're ready for this? Like, are you, if we send you to a company to do it, can you run it? And I was like, yes, I can absolutely do it, because having that opportunity at the class to validate the knowledge that I had and to improve it gave me that confidence to be able to say that without hemming and hawing and being like, well, maybe. No, it was like, yeah, I can do it. I'm ready. Yeah. Put me in, coach. Right? It was that kind of moment.
Wow. And up until this point, I'm sure people notice you are a humble person. So for you to say, yes, I am ready, to that director, that must have been truth. That must have been certitude, for sure.
Yeah. So I as a kind of I guess, personal philosophy, I don't ever want to make a statement that I'm not certain of. And, even with that as a guiding principle, I still make mistakes. Everyone does. But in general, if I'm not 100% certain of something, I'm not going to make a statement that I am 100% certain about it. So I'm going to like, well, I'm pretty sure that's the case, or, we may need to do a bit more research, right? So those are the typical answers I'm giving. So yes, to your point, when I was asked that question, are you ready for this? It wasn't a maybe, it wasn't, I think so. It was, yes, I'm ready. And it was because I had done the work in advance, right? I'm very much the kind of person where I need to do my prep work. I need to do the study in advance and make sure, okay, now I'm confident that I'm ready because I've done the work. So if I get asked a tricky question, I'm ready for it. Versus, some folks are great at just get up there and wing it, do it live. I'm typically not that person. So it was, it was, I think it probably stood out as, well, Mark is usually not that confident in what he says. So, all right, let's take it seriously.
Yes. And I'm glad that they did, because you were phenomenal. You are phenomenal. So absolutely. I know that you also continued getting certification. So what's the value of a certification in the world of cybersecurity, and what are some of the challenges with them?
That's a good question. So yeah, one thing I didn't mention is, while I was in some of those other roles prior to getting that consulting gig, is there was one certification that was probably key at the time, and it probably still is on paper really important. It's the CISSP, which is kind of a ubiquitous certification for consultants. I'd say that I can't say a lot of, but there are definitely employers that they won't even look at your resume if it doesn't have CISSP on it if you're going for a consulting role. And we could go into a whole lot of, is that valid? Is that justified? I don't know. But it does seem to still be the case in a lot of cases, especially for your first time being a consultant. Basically, it's just a cert that shows that you've put in this many hours in professional context, because you have to have a certain number of years of experience to earn it. That you've put in this amount of study, because it is a big kind of beefy test that it's got a lot of questions on it in a broad range of things. Again, it's that going back to that generalist idea. It's that inch deep but a mile wide. There's a lot of stuff they cover in the CISSP material, and a lot of it's kind of dry and boring. And so there are definitely parts of it that I've never applied because they're more like physical security based than they are cybersecurity based, like fence heights and illumination levels for areas that's more like DoD needs to know about, stuff like that, right? But it was instrumental in me getting that role, I think, right? The fact that I had that on my resume was important. And again, I did try to learn from it what I could, and I'm sure there are things that I either learned new or it strengthened my knowledge of them. It definitely changed my way of thinking, because one of the things when I was studying for the CISSP was learning the different domains of knowledge that they break it into. That was where I actually started to realize how much in my infrastructure training had been applicable to security, right? Those things I mentioned earlier of access control lists and user groups and things like that. I never thought of them as security before. They were just part of what you had to do to manage the system. But when I was then getting a formal security training, those concepts came up, and I was like, oh, I've been doing that for 5 years. I never even realized that I was doing security work for 5 years, right? And it changed how I looked at it. So I think there is benefit to that. It's not fun. It's not the sexy part of doing it, but it can help you get your foot in the door with an organization where that's just one of the check boxes that they look for in candidates is, do they have certs? Different cert organizations have pros and cons. There's some that are better than others in terms of what they teach you, and then some in terms of the value that just having that acronym or that symbol on your resume gives you. But there are, I would say it's important. It's certainly important to have your school education, your formal degree in some area. It doesn't have to be in cybersecurity, by the way, to get into cybersecurity. It helps. But a lot of people have gotten into cybersecurity that didn't have that as their background. I've literally worked with people who had philosophy majors and English majors, and they're excellent at cybersecurity, right? That's real. If you have the option to take a cybersecurity course, it's, more and more schools I think are getting better ones. It's still kind of new in that field, but that's important. But then having some certs it's never a bad idea. So, it could be an entry-level cert like, Security Plus, Network Plus and Security Plus are very well recognized. They give you kind of general knowledge. Something like the CISSP for consulting work. SANS, which is typically you're going to be in a professional setting before you start taking SANS courses because they're so expensive. But their certifications are still pretty, very well respected. And you can learn a lot if you apply yourself in those classes. There's a lot of content that can be gained from almost any certification, so that they are worth pursuing. If you have one, does that mean you're immediately an expert? No, there are a lot of people who they can pass the test, but they don't actually know a whole lot about what they're talking about. But it typically is the more indicators an employer sees, the more likely that they can feel confident that, okay, that person has a degree and they have some certs and they have work experience. Those kind of go together to build confidence. But to get that entry level opportunity, it's often, it's more who you network with in school and professional organizations that gets the door open before you have the chance.
Right. You need that agency to kind of get you through that next level. What obstacles did you face along the road?
I was probably fortunate in not having a lot of outward obstacles, outside obstacles. Most of them probably came from within. Again, that kind of maybe lack of confidence, the wanting to be sure before I, commit to something, which, there are a lot of times in life you actually can't be 100% sure. You have to be 80% sure, and that's good enough, right? Being comfortable with those kinds of decisions was a challenge. Like anytime especially like once you have your job, right? If you're looking at maybe changing to another job, there's a risk there, right? You're taking a risk of, I think it's going to be better over here. Those kinds of things are definitely challenging. Two things that stand out just in the job hunt space that I think they were really important lessons to me, that nobody in school ever taught me this, and it would have been great to know in advance. One, you're going to apply to way, way more places than you're going to get interviews at. Like, you're just going to get no response from the vast majority of them. I don't care who you are, how good your skills look on paper. It's just the case. There are tons of companies that are hiring, and they're looking for something very specific, or they're just interviewing so many people that you get in late and you miss your window and you don't even know it. So, I've submitted hundreds of applications through my career, and I've had dozens of interviews, and I've had, a few roles. So that's important just to know. Like, you're going to spend more resources and get fewer results, and eventually you're going to start getting the results. But it can be disheartening when you're just like submitting, day in and day out, week after week, submitting applications and getting nothing. That's hard.
Yeah. And I've heard that from many people.
And it's real, and it's in every space, right? Especially in tech, but I think it's everywhere. And another one is that job requirements on postings for for positions, they're a wish list. They're not. It's not set in stone. There will be some things like they may say certain things are requirements, and then there will be certain things that are like, these are nice to have, right? Yeah, and it's a mile long, and the reason for that is a lot of these position descriptions get made by committee, right? You have an original hiring manager. They're looking to fill a position. They have here's what we need. And then, but they have a teammate, who, it would be really great if they could also do this. Let's add that on there, right? And so they make this bigger and bigger list of requirements, air quotes requirements, that almost no single person in the world has all of it. Mm-hmm. There would be some people who have 90% of it, some people have 50% of it, but pretty much when you're going for, so one of the obstacles to going back to your question is I would see those job descriptions and be discouraged, like, I can't apply. I don't have that. I don't meet the requirements. Still apply. If you think you have half of what's on that job description, apply, because there's a chance that they're having trouble finding the right person for the role. The 50% you don't have might be the less important 50%, and you can learn it, right? If you look at a job description and you think, I don't have it all, but I know I can learn it, apply for that job, because you can do self-study. You might get professional training in the role. There's a lot of opportunities there. Mm-hmm. But you have to be willing to put yourself out there and try it. Because if you don't apply, you definitely won't get the job, right? So that was a big obstacle. And learning that, again, I learned that later in my career, that like, I can get that role, because they don't actually need 100% of what they listed as the requirements.
Yeah.
Now you won't necessarily know which of those are hard requirements and which of them aren't. Yeah. And you may learn that in the interview process. And sometimes you'll have an interview and it won't go well because you didn't have what they were looking for. And that's also part of it is it's rejection, right? It's learning to be okay with, that company didn't want me, and that would have been a great opportunity. I was really excited about it, but I didn't get it. Yeah. There are others. It's in some ways it's like dating, right? There's a lot of people out there. There's a lot of companies out there, and you got to find the right fit, and it's got to work both ways, or it's not going to be healthy.
And that fit is not just a list of requirements. That fit can be a human connection, whether you get along with your future manager or your peers, or whether it's a matter of an alignment of your values with their values. The cultural fit is, I think, something that we have to stress. But I love what you mentioned, how challenging it is to get your foot in the door, but to try and not to get disheartened during that process or take it personally and give up. Definitely don't give up. There's more demands and there aren't enough of us.
Yes.
And you. So definitely never give up. But I think it's so important to remain humble and honest in this process.
Yes.
To acknowledge in that interview that you are very good at these things, but some things you're still working on.
Yes.
And I think so much more a hiring manager will hire that person who will admit their weaknesses versus the person who will only talk about all the great things that they are. I really think that creates that trust that you need to be working in cybersecurity.
Yeah, I would agree completely. The one mistake you don't want to make is lying on your resume, because in an interview that gets sniffed out, right? They'll ask you questions about a thing and you can't speak to it and you look like an idiot. But it's also a trust building exercise of, here's how I present myself, and now if you ask me, I can back it up, I can speak to it. And at the entry level, there's not a lot on your resume, so it's hard because it doesn't feel very impressive. But if you're going for entry-level positions, there shouldn't be much of an expectation of that. And as things move along, maintaining that honesty is really important, because there have been examples of very high level professionals in really big companies who it came out years later that they lied on their resume and they lost their jobs, right? And then now they become a laughing stock in the industry, and it hurts their career choices and options moving forward. Just don't do it, right? It's not worth trying to make yourself look better in a way that could backfire. Like, it's better to just be humble, be honest about who you are. Now, work hard to make who you are the best and most impressive it can be. Do things whether it's as a hobby or in school or whatever, like apply yourself so that you have those things that you can put on your resume and say, I did that and I can speak to that honestly.
Absolutely. And it's worthwhile also leveraging that agency, the teachers, the mentors, the people who kind of have your back in this process to be your references. I think references are a very strong element to being recognized as a viable candidate too.
Yes, anybody who's willing to vouch for you, like that speaks to your quality in a number of different ways. Because that's probably an area where if I had advice to give to my younger self, it would be network more, interact with more people and make a good impression on more people. Don't be as shy, like go to more professional functions and grow your network, because having people who think well of you and will speak well of you, that's worth its weight in gold. It really is. It's equally as important as what you can do when you come to the job.
Absolutely. I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into that rabbit hole with you about the concepts of hacking, penetration testing. You say you're on a red team, and so the world of cybersecurity has a whole lot of terminology that is massively confusing. So let's just go there.
Okay.
And define the difference between a red team, a blue team, then you have purple.
Yeah, sure. So it's some of this borrows from actually, I think this is military lingo to begin with, which I have no background in, so I can't speak to the actual origin. But cybersecurity is a big part of military operations now. Every world nation has their cybersecurity arm of their different branches of military. And so some of this terminology kind of bled into the general non-military professional cybersecurity world. So there are different concepts of different teams. So you have the red team, you have the blue team, and now a more popular idea is the concept of a purple team. So the red team are the good actors who are doing the things that bad actors do, right? They're pen testing, they're doing adversary simulation. They're trying. The short of it is that they're trying to find the holes in the system, the flaws, the gaps, before the bad guys do. And so, that in my current role, I work as a red teamer. So we do that. So it might be, here's a web application that was written in-house. It's custom code. What's wrong with it? Like what holes might, what might someone be able to do? So we target on that application, we test it, we attack it the way that, we try to, our job is to put ourselves in the head of a bad actor. Like, what, if I wanted to cause harm, what would I do? What would, what are the techniques and the tactics, techniques, and procedures that I would use to try and exploit the system to either cost the company money or maybe gain myself a financial benefit if I were a criminal, or some other, just take it down to be a jerk and make it take it offline or deface a website, right? Things like that.
Yep.
So that's where red team is. They're the attack team. They're the simulated bad actor. The blue team is the flip side of that. The blue team are the defenders. So the blue team are, you have in most organizations, you either internally or as an outsourced third-party service, you have a security operations center. You have the people who are kind of watching for alerts. They have systems that allow them to look for attacks. And if there is an attack ongoing, it allows them to start responding to it, to just, if a machine has gotten infected with malware, take that machine off the network and handle it, take it offline so that it can be treated and cleaned up. If some system comes under attack, maybe be able to block access from certain origin IPs on the internet so they can't attack anymore. That's kind of their job. So they're the defenders. So their job is to catch real attacks. Yeah. And there's an interaction with these. In a mature organization, there's an interaction where red and blue work together, right? The purpose of red is to make blue better. So there's no point being like a rock star hacker who can get in there and own all the boxes and take control of things if you can't then communicate that to somebody who can fix it. Because if you can do those things, you're just causing trouble. If you can do those things and give information in a way that lets someone fix it so no one else can do it the way you did, now you're showing value. You're actually helping the organization to get better. So red and blue have to work together to kind of reach their more mature state, or in an anime reference, to reach their final form, which is the purple team. And so the concept of a purple team is it's interactive. Now it can take a lot of different forms. It can be we're in the before times, literally in a room together, and okay, red team's going to do an attack. Purple team, what did you see? Did that show up? Oh, you didn't even see it? Well, there's something we need to fix right there, because you should be able to catch that, right? That's a common attack.
Right. Or,
okay, yes, you saw it. Can you stop it? Okay, maybe we're missing a way to be able to control it. Or yes, you saw it and you stopped it. Okay, great. Let's that's a green check mark for that went well. That's something we're going to report on. And it's exercise after exercise. So that's more of a kind of a collaborative one. Then you might have a more real world red team versus purple team engagement, where red team is going to conduct an exercise in stealth, so the blue team does not know about it. And the red team is going to, they're kind of, doing their thing. They're running an engagement for a week, 2 weeks, however long it needs to be to test the organization, see if they can gain access. And the blue team, if they catch it, they're responding to it. They don't even know, they think they're actually stopping a real attack. And then after the fact, getting everyone together, like, okay, here's what we were doing. Here's what the red team was doing when we attacked. And here's what the blue team was seeing and responding. Here's what they did well. Here's what they missed, right? And then the outcome of that is the things that we missed, or the things that could have gone better, here's how we make them better. Because again, the whole point of the exercise is to protect the organization, to improve the security of it. And the insights that a red team can offer are, they're the perspective of an attacker and using the techniques of an attacker. Because the blue team it's a specialty, right? It's a specialization. They have to learn what their systems show them when an attack comes in, but they don't often learn what was the attacker doing that led to that, right? They may have a blind spot there. So some of them do, and a lot don't. And so the purple team is a way of bridging that gap to like give the insight of, okay, that thing you saw when your alerts went off, here's what I was actually doing. And that can be really, really instrumental in building knowledge of, okay, I'm seeing something weird. I've never seen it before, but I know about this attack that the red team was using. I think it might be related. Let's look into that. Versus just not having that background knowledge. It can be like, well, what is that? I don't know what it is. I'm going to focus on the things I do know.
Yeah. I love how you're highlighting the importance of communication and collaboration in cybersecurity. So important.
Yeah, it's crucial. That's one of the, fortunately, one of the areas where my homeschooling benefited me, is my mom really drilled on English skills, like a lot. And so I think I have a decent vocabulary. I have a decent ability to communicate, and I'm very good at communicating to other technical actors, right? So other people who, if we're at peer level in terms of knowledge, I can be very precise with my language when I need to be. But it's also important to learn when not to go into that level of detail, right? If you're writing to an executive, you probably don't want to write a one-page letter full of technical jargon. You want to summarize things and simplify them in a way that applies more to the business side of the language rather than the technical side. And it's not like some people call that dumbing down. I don't think that's the right way to think about it, because it's a different specialty, right? Yeah. So it's speaking to a different audience, and doing your best to communicate to your audience is absolutely crucial, because you can have excellent ideas in your head, but if you can't get them out and give them to somebody, then they're going to have limited value.
Right. And at the end of the day, it's about the business impact that you're trying to address.
Yeah, definitely. It's, there's a reason your job is worth money, right? That the business is paying a salary for you to do a certain thing because they see value in it. And it's because it protects them from something that would be even more costly.
Absolutely. And, the threat landscape keeps evolving. They know the detection functionalities that exist. They know the types of solutions, technologies that may be able to protect an organization, and they adapt like water to that new environment. And so that threat keeps evolving too. So it's an ever continuous cycle of testing and improving and testing and improving. And
they being the attackers there, right? And that's true of both the actual bad actors and the the simulated bad actors, right? So the red team has to keep skills sharp because new vulnerabilities are discovered every day and new attacks happen every day. And if the red team gets lazy and doesn't keep up with what's going on, their value decreases. So it's you in this role, especially on the red team side, and this is true on blue as well, but in security in general, you have to keep sharp with what's latest, what's new, like what applies to your environment, because as soon as you're a week out of date, you're behind, and the actual criminals aren't going to wait for you to catch up. So it's important to be interested in learning and continuing to the viewpoint is a lifelong learner, right? In this field, if you're not a lifelong learner, you're gonna have challenges. You want to keep pushing yourself to learn something new, try something new, experience something new that applies to your field.
Right. And the threat is in every time zone. The threat may not sleep. The threat may be an automated botnet, and they don't stop because you're tired.
the internet is worldwide, so an attack can come from anywhere if a system is on the internet.
So let's talk about the future. You said you stumbled into cybersecurity. You also said this may not be the end of the road for you. So any plans, anything that you're learning right now, or anything that you would like to do in the future?
That's a very challenging and good question. So as far as learning now, it's always just kind of brushing up on different ways of thinking, different techniques, different views. So it's not a new idea, but it's newer to me. Is the concept of there's the concept of DevOps, and then there's DevSecOps, which is the security aspect of DevOps. That's a new area that I've been kind of learning just the philosophy of. It maps on to what I already do, but it's a different way of thinking of it, and it's much more to try and fit it in earlier in the business flow of, if we're developing code, let's consider security earlier in the process rather than at the end, right? That's one of the fundamental ideas of it. So that's newer to me because I've very much been on the reactive side of let's evaluate the thing after it's built. It's a very different world to be involved in, like looking at the code while something is in development. That's very different. As far as my focus and what I'm going to be doing, web application testing has it's been a fairly not real recent shift, but it's been taking up more and more percentage of my time in recent last couple of years. And it's something that I enjoy because it's really broad. Like you could be just a web application tester and never run out of unique things to encounter as a tester. So that's really interesting to me because it's useful to go deeper and to really learn something, at a more advanced level, but it's also useful to have exposure to different things. And web application testing is an area where from one app to the next, they're completely different and they use completely different technologies, and your approach has to be completely different, which can be a challenge, right? If you've got a time limit on it, that can be hard, but it's also really exciting. As for where I go from there, I don't really know. I know I'm going to continue to be hands on keyboard. I'm going to continue to be doing testing because it's what interests me. I've been like a mentor to others, but I'm not a manager, so that's probably not the avenue that I'm going down. But that's the general direction that I'm going in. And I know I'll still be learning because that's a must. I have to. If I get to the point where my learning stops, then I've probably done myself a disservice, and I've done my employer a disservice as well. So it'll be web apps and it'll be learning new stuff, and that's probably about as precise as I can be.
Yeah, no, but that's great. And that's definitely the evolution that we're seeing. Security was an afterthought not so long ago. Now it's much more embedded in the fabric of an operation of a business. But now everything is code-driven, web applications, mobile applications. Everybody's using some type of a cloud-based application. So now the concept of building security in the design of that application versus just building an application and seeing if it's secure after it's already been done, definitely is the next step where all these organizations are now moving towards recognizing that there are cost savings by putting security in the design of an application versus as an afterthought.
Yeah, I think that's probably a really good area for folks. Like, I wish I'd learned about it years ago, because it helps to bridge the gap between the language of security and the business, and make it, help to paint the picture of why this is important, how this can actually save you money, because it really is important. Now, there's a ton of companies that they've still never even heard of it. It's bigger, more mature companies that are starting to get this picture. So there's a lot of companies that, excuse me, they need the resources that can show them that can identify, here's how this can help, right? It seems like a burden at first because we're adding something new to the process, but here's why it's better than not doing it now, because we do it later, it's going to be way harder, right? It's the cliche is what is it? An ounce of prevention is a pound of cure, right? It's easier to do it now than to do it later when the situation's worse.
Absolutely. Now, didn't you tell me you were studying German?
A little bit, yeah. Ein bisschen.
Ein bisschen?
Yeah. A little bit. It's just as a on the side hobby kind of thing. I have like Duolingo and one other app that I use on a daily basis just to learn a few words. The background of that is there's a German band that I like that I've listened to for years, and so I've been exposed to German as a language for a long time. But it was just something I was like, you know what? I never learned a language as a kid. That would be another thing that I should have had in my earlier education. Would have been great. Would be another language. Never learned another language other than C++, which doesn't really count. So better late than never. So I probably have enough that I could, if I were in Germany, I could order at a restaurant, kinda. I could ask where the bathroom is, and that would be probably about it.
So much humility. I love it. So what do you wish for future generations?
In general, or in from an industry focus?
Whichever you like. Maybe they're one and the same. Maybe there's some overlap.
I guess there's overlap, yeah. So, I mean, I think it's just a general wish of where things should go is, people having opportunities that they should have, right? And that's you can say, people is very broad. You can insert a specific group here. There are tons of people in every walk of life who they miss opportunities. It could be for really bad reasons. It could be for completely benign reasons, but a lot of it is just exposure, right? So not knowing that an opportunity is out there, you miss it. Knowing that an opportunity is out there, but then, the person who's the decision maker, maybe they've got, certain views on who is right for this role. There are certain stereotypes, right? So, hackers are people who live in their mother's basement and wear hoodies and don't ever go outside. That's a cliche. It's not accurate, right? I would say the majority of hackers dress professionally. They work in a field that they're working professional jobs. They may not all wear a button up all the time, but they know how to, they're in meetings with managers and executives, and they're doing timesheet reports, and they're working a job just like every other professional. So there are definitely cliches that get lost, and like sometimes I think there's probably that perception of like, oh, you're not the right person for this role because you're in bucket X, and a lot of that just needs to go, because what it comes down to is, can you do the work, and can you do the work well, and can you contribute to this organization? And to their credit, a lot of organizations are getting better about that. They're updating, that. I've seen a lot of, as an example, a lot of organizations are taking the initial practice of, when a resume is submitted for a review, the names are removed from it, so that you don't know the gender of the person, you don't know where they're from. So that goes away as a factor, at least in the early consideration stages, right? Just to give people the equality of opportunity that is fair and equitable. I think that's a big thing that a lot of people need. Now, specific to this industry, right? One of the challenges that I see a lot is there's a position that has a requirement of 5 years experience, but it's an entry-level position. And that's, employers have to update that kind of thing. Like, that's just a way of thinking that doesn't work. There have even been cases where there were requirements for 5 years of experience on a subject that had only existed as a formal technology for like 3 years. So it's literally impossible to have had that many years of experience. Like, that's just companies having a minimum arbitrary bar that they have requirements for that's not thoughtful. And again, to their credit, a lot of companies are updating that. They're getting better. You do have really good hiring managers who understand like that's not realistic. I know that's our minimum policy requirement for this, but we're going to change that. And as long as the company can be flexible and work with that, it's great. For the ones that can't, they probably need to update their ways a little bit.
Yes. And I love how you just highlighted the purpose of the Triangle Net that I started, which is to connect people with opportunity to learn and work in cybersecurity, but also to help others succeed in cybersecurity. And this is why we're having this little chat, to just share your story and share how you embrace the opportunities given to you and really succeeded and are doing really great on your little journey and still not quite done.
I hope I'm not done. Yeah, no, it's I've been, my background, I came from modest means. I wasn't like dirt poor, but I certainly wasn't in a wealthy context. But I was still very fortunate to have parents who tried their best and put me gave me the exposure to the things that they could. And then a lot of it came down to, once I was in that circumstance, there were other people there who were generous of spirit, and like I mentioned, teachers who went out of their way to help me because I needed it. And that's an attitude that we all should try to embody when there's somebody that we can help. We should, right? So actually, to revise one of my earlier answers, one of the people that I look up to most in world history is Fred Rogers. So for anybody who doesn't know him, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was a very important TV show that was on when I was a kid. It was on public television. And this was just a guy who believed in being good to other people. And I think he was probably about as close to a modern day saint as I've ever seen. Like, he was one of those people who he genuinely cared about other humans and he wanted them to do well. Didn't matter who they were, didn't matter where they were from. It was, just be good to people and help people. And he encouraged that. He encouraged that spirit. This was a person who, when the funding for public education or for public television was, it was on the block to be chopped in Congress, he went up and testified as to how important it was and why he thought it was crucial for kids who didn't have access to some of the resources, that they could watch this on TV and have a good message that wasn't, it wasn't violent, it wasn't, silly entertainment and goofiness. It was educational. And he was one of the people that got that funding passed at that time to make that continue to be a thing. And if we had more people with even a fraction of that attitude in the world, I think the world would be a much better place. So we should do what he encouraged, which is try to be a helper, try to help others.
Yes, I love that. And that little testimonial that he gave to Congress is on YouTube. I've seen it, so I'm sure it's somewhere on YouTube. And it really, again, stresses the importance of values, of not just focusing on a skill and checking a box, but really just focusing on your soft skills, the values that you want to represent as a human being. That matters more than anything else ever throughout your life, no matter what you do. So thank you for making that point. Very important. So to kind of wrap things up, what is your definition of success?
That's a really hard one. Success, I guess it's a little cliche, but I would say success it's more of a process than an end state, right? In the same way as I want to be a lifelong learner, like I'm never going to be done learning, but I should be learning, right? So that's very important. Success is the same kind of thing, right? So there's not really an end state to being successful. It's are you working toward what you want to be working toward? Is there a goal, right? That you should still have goals that you're working toward, and you make incremental successes along the way, but you never stop. I guess from a professional standpoint, maybe it's retirement, but even that, like I imagine when I'm retired, assuming I succeed in getting there, if I succeed in getting there, I'll still want to work some kind of a part-time job that I maybe feel like helps me give back to do something that might actually change the world more than what I'm doing today. Because what I'm doing now is helpful for companies, and those companies change the world, so that matters. But it's not a direct kind of contribution. So talking about, being a helper, or, something like teaching, where you're not going to make as much money. So maybe that's for later in my life, right? That might be successful, is if I can help people learn or help them, do better from where they are. That would be a measure of success. But again, even that is a process. It doesn't, it's not help one person and you're done. Like, all right, I've succeeded. It's keep doing what you can do for as long as you can do it. And that could be professional, that could be personal, right? There's a lot of different avenues of that. But yeah, I think that's probably the closest to defining success that I could get to.
It's perfect. I love it. Yes. So what are you grateful for, Mark?
Oh, just about everything. I try to be grateful for everything. It's easy to forget to be grateful for things. But it's, the people, the opportunities that I've had, like, even, like I said, growing up not wealthy, but still safe, right? My parents worked to find a place where they could raise their kids where they would be reasonably safe. Did their best to guide our education and give us opportunities. Those were foundational. All those teachers that I mentioned who went out of their way, were generous of spirit. I'm very thankful for them. All the people I've worked with along the way who've, they've added to me. They've checked me when I was maybe out of line, and especially my early career, and corrected me and taught me things that I needed to learn at the time. My current life now, I'm married. I've got 2 cats. I've got a nice house. I'm doing well, and I'm thankful for all those things. And there are little things that we take for granted that we forget to be thankful for. But having clean running water, there's a lot of people in the world who don't. Having access to any education, even if maybe it's not the perfect or best education, a lot of people who don't have that same access. Mm-hmm. And being aware of that, being thankful for that, and then doing what we can, hopefully to contribute to that, and having the opportunity to contribute to that, right? So as you have success and you make more money, you can maybe donate to charities and causes that you care about, or volunteer your time, right? There are local groups that they take volunteer work for all kinds of ways to help people. Habitat for Humanity is one that a lot of people know about, where you literally spend a weekend helping to build a physical house, right? Like, that's a thing. And things like that are great. And just having the opportunity to do that is important too.
Yes. I love everything you just said. There's so much to take for granted, but so much to be grateful for too.
Yeah.
So thank you. Well, I want to thank you, Mark, for being a teacher to me. You explained cybersecurity to me in plain English. And I think that is such an important skill to have, being able to explain things in layman's terms and making it more accessible and helping that person on their journey into cybersecurity along the way. So simplifying the language sometimes can have a huge impact, and you had that impact on me, because I really progressed my interest and my education, because you were one of those role models to me, who showed me I can do this, but I can also do that. I can raise that bar for myself. And so I've been trying to do that for myself as well. So I wanted to thank you for that. And just for being that role model to keep learning and pushing yourself and doing your hobby as a job, because that's kind of how you interchanged the concept. And I think that is fantastic. And I love how you keep striving for mastery while staying perfectly humble at the same time. So
not perfect, but I try.
Yeah, but it's such a beautiful thing to see, to know someone like you. So thank you for sharing your story. Very inspiring, I am sure, not just to me, but to everybody who listens to this podcast. So thank you so much, Mark.
Well, thank you for all those kind words, and I'm glad in whatever way I helped. I know it was your desire to learn that made that what I was offering useful. But I'm glad that whatever I've offered helped. And thank you for the opportunity to be on here and speak with you. I think this is great. Again, what you're doing with Triangle Net, this is really exciting. So I'm glad to contribute to it in my small way.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
On the field to get some. On the real, we appear to get gone. Victory is ours, bring the chip home. Galactic, and I'm looking to get more. Raise it up, seen but you don't know. Running like the blood, pumping from the pressure of adrenaline rush. We crush whatever we touch. Where you been, yo? Everyone know. And if you still don't get it, let it chill for a minute. Time is money, and trust me, man, I'm all business. And if you want something done, do yourself to get it finished. Wake up, victory's mine. On top, still on the grind. Gotta go get it right now. Holla at me if you with me. It's time.
I think the stars above, I know that we're gon' make it.
It'll take all we got, we gon' make it. Show the world that I shine in our greatness. Keep it real, never gon' fake this. Till we make it, till we make it. Taking off, flying high like a spaceship. Take control, take a shot, what you waiting for? Keep it real, never gon' fake this. Till we make it, till we make it. Second verse, I'm telling you I'm ready to go, letting you know, cause I'm never alone. The ones that I roll with are incredibly known for getting down to the nitty gritty. If you're really with me, let's go. Moves made, dues paid, most talk but don't do a thing. We certified, observers I come through and give a true display. We champions, understand me standing under a victory canopy. Canopy the enemy was hitting keys, ready to drive at top speed, let's get it out. Wake up, victory's mine. On top, still on the grind. Gotta go get it right now, holla at me if you're with me. It's time.
I think the stars above, I know that we're gon' make it.
It'll take all we got, we gon' make it. Show the world that I shine in our greatness. Keep it real, never gon' fake this. Till we make it, till we make it. Taking off, flying high like a spaceship. Take control, take a shot, what you waiting for? Keep it real, never gon' fake this. Till we make it, till we make it.
I think the stars above, I know that we're gon' make it. I know the ground below my feet's gon' lift me up. I thank the stars above, I know that we're gon' make it. I know the ground below my feet's gon' lift me up.
It'll take all we got, we gon' make it. Show the world that I shine in our greatness. Keep it real, never gon' fake this. Till we make it, till we make it. Taking off, flying high like a spaceship.